Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Bravo Leadership Conversation of the year. My name is Maria Lourdes Terán, and I'm Vice President and Head of the Council of the Americas office in Miami. Today, we have a great pleasure of hosting a very special conversation with two distinguished past Bravo honorees, Andrés Gluski, CEO of the AES Corporation, and our Chairman at the American Society Council of the Americas. Andrés, thank you for joining us. It's wonderful to begin the year with you. And also, we have a longtime friend of our organization and someone we admire greatly, Fernando González, CEO of Cemex. Fernando, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you, Maria.
One of our core missions here at the Council of the Americas is providing a space for dialogue on the most important issues impacting the Western Hemisphere. The two global leaders we host today will discuss a variety of topics around sustainability with a special focus on climate change and the critical role the private sector must play in addressing its challenges. We will begin with a conversation, and then we will open up the questions from the audience. Begin a very special thank you to our sponsors and partners of our year-long Bravo Leadership Series, Bank of America, the AES Corporation, Mambu Latin America, Microsoft, MasterCard, Salesforce, SAP, Softec, Chubb Latin America, Diageo, Greenberg Traurig, America's Quarterly, CNN en Español, and our partners at the Inter-American Development Bank. It is a very strong list, and many of you have been with us for many years. So now I pass the floor to Andrés, who will begin the conversation with Fernando. Andrés?
Well, thank you very much, Maria. Thank you all for joining us. It's a real honor and pleasure to join Fernando in this discussion today. He's been one of the leaders of climate objectives, let's say, in his sector for sure, and in business in general. So starting with that, I would like to ask Fernando, since climate action has been at the forefront of your agenda and topics of discussion, I'd like to start asking you, what are the objectives and targets of Cemex sustainability efforts? And can you share with us some of the progress that you've made in the last couple of years?
Sure. Thank you, Andres. And thank you to the Council of the Americas for hosting this conversation. I think that the topic is, on the one hand, is a decades-old kind of topic, but at the same time is so new because in the last, let's say, couple of years, society in general and specific relevant stakeholders to businesses, they just have changed the interpretation of climate action. So we have adjusted to new, much more profound and requests for faster decisions to be made in our industry. So our objective is to be net zero in 2050. We declared that last year. We changed the objectives we used to have by 2030, which were the sort of midterm objectives. And we adjusted those objectives to several accepted scenarios, starting with the Paris Agreement, the beyond 2 degrees scenario, the race to zero, the 1.5 degrees scenario, and what we did is to align our intent, align our objectives on CO2 reduction to all these now accepted scenarios in which you can specifically define numeric targets. So our new target for 2030 is to reduce 35% to 40% our CO2 emissions when using the base we've been using, which is 1990. So this reduction of about 40% in CO2 is a very sizable one. And the targets we used to have that were not as demanding as the ones we have now, we brought them forward to 2025. So now we have annual targets, we have 2025 targets, 2030, and our aspiration to 2050. So that's That's what is new. And to give you an idea, our CO2 emission in cement per ton of cement is coming from 620 kilos per ton of cement in 2020 to 475. That's a very sizable reduction. It's twice the amount we have done in the last 25 years. And the good news is that it is possible, it is feasible.
Well, thank you, Fernando. It's interesting. So much of what you said is similar to what we're doing at AES. I mean, in terms of objectives, it's quite amazing. Few companies, I think, or two companies are so aligned. So, look, we have a net zero from electricity target from 2040. And we have a net zero from all scopes. That means from our suppliers and our users of our electricity of zero by 2050. Our goal is to be 50% of the energy we produce renewable by 2025, and less than 10% of the megawatts we produce from coal by 2025. So we have some longer term objectives like you do, and we have some shorter term objectives. And very similar, I know we're both doing the science-based target initiatives for these reductions. We've also done the 2-degree scenarios of the UN to see the resiliency of the company. And this was very interesting for us. Like, are you investing those things that will be resilient in the future? What are you doing also to help meet the less than 2 degrees increase in the global climate? And we were also the first US electric company to really undertake the sort of task force on climate disclosure, the TCFD, 2 years ago. So these are all things that are very similar to what you've done. And I agree with you that the situation is changing very rapidly, that we've had to increase our targets. In other words, the targets that I would have given you a year ago, we've moved them up. And the reason is that we're seeing more urgency of making the change in climate. Last year, in 2020, our renewable business grew 70%, to give you an idea. And it was already a reasonably large business. So we did 5 gigawatts of new agreements last year. That's about 2 million consumers, to give you an idea. And at the same time, we are retiring coal plants and we're running them differently. Because one of the things is, how do you make this transition feasible? See, one thing is to have a great target, but at the same time, you got to keep the lights on. And if the lights aren't on or go off because of a storm or something like that, it's a very serious issue. Not only businesses suffer, but hospitals and people who need the electricity at home. So for us, it's a question, we're very clear where we're going, is how to make this transition in a both a cost-effective way, but also resilient, because we do nothing of jumping ahead of where the technologies are. So just like you, I know one of the initiatives you have is like funding new technologies, in an agreement that you did at the World Economic Forum. I'd like to hear you maybe talk a little bit about that. And maybe I can talk a little bit about what we're doing in the new technologies as well.
Sure. I do believe, Andres, that in several industries there are many similarities, and that's a good reason to try to find different partnerships for different industries to complement each other. In our case, because of the nature of our business, electricity is, it's a scope 2, is the most relevant component of our scope 2 emissions. And you can imagine the objectives that we have, which is, growing green and renewable energy from the current 30% we are using to about 50%. So that is not a minor. Is not a minor issue. But let me tell you something. One of the issues we clarified ourselves last year is that there are several very, very relevant issues to transform in businesses, at least in our opinion. The first one, in our case, of course, going to describe our case. The first one, we are obliged to offer our customers, to offer the construction industry low carbon products for the industry to be able to build, to develop their projects with lower carbon materials. At the end, that's our main objective. If we don't achieve on increasing and enlarging our low carbon or carbon neutral family of products to the industry, then the success could be really at risk. Now, in that regard, I can tell you we have already introduced the first net zero CO2 ready-mix product in several markets where we are participating. And it's been a success because it's been used for several iconic projects in different parts of the world. But that's really one of the, I think, 4 issues we have to focus to offer our customers a low or neutral carbon family of products for them to use in their projects. The second one is everything that is related to decarbonizing our operations. I cannot get into details because of the specifics of the cement process, but there are several known processes and technologies we can develop, we can execute, we can implement that will allow us to reduce the 40%, naming alternative fuels with very high contents of biomass, fillers of different nature, natural fillers like limestone, like pozzolan, like others, reducing the clinker factor, reducing emissions per ton of cement, using renewable and green energy for cement production. So there are several levels using alternative raw materials with lower CO2 emissions. So there are several alternatives for us to reduce CO2 in our operations. By the way, last year we reduced our CO2 emissions in Europe by 35%. And it's not by chance that it happened in Europe, because Europe is, in my opinion, what is much closer to the concept of a green and circular economy. So we managed to move faster because of that reason. The third component, which is also very relevant in our case, is developing technologies, alternative technologies on cement production, alternative technologies for fuels. It is new methods for us to achieve net zero in the future. One clarification: our 40% reduction by 2030 is not depending on unknown technologies. That's a to-do list. That's a number of initiatives that are defined in roadmaps that we have developed plant by plant. So that shouldn't be an issue. But there are new technologies: carbon capture, carbon use, new processes in order to produce cement. Cement produced with solar energy directly, that might be doable. I don't know how soon, but so far we are investing in that technology and it's moving forward nicely. So that's another component on this job on moving towards a net zero. And the last one is, what is it that we and the associations we belong to and the partnerships we have, how is it that we can promote, facilitate, influence the development of a circular and green economy in the markets and countries we participate? That chapter itself might be as relevant as the other 3, particularly in markets and countries in which there must be or a tremendous effort on moving forward into a circular economy might be needed, and businesses can play a significant role in it.
Well, I love hearing that the technologies exist for one part, and there's no doubt that Cemex is playing a leading role in the cement sector. of making this transition. You've been thinking about it for some time. You're actually executing. In our case, it's interesting. You mentioned customers, and that is actually absolutely key for us. Last year, we did the first long-term contract for 24/7 renewable energy with Google. And you might say, well, a lot of people have, renewable energy or claim to be 100%. Yes, they may be net, all renewable energy, but are they really getting renewable energy? Because renewable energy is intermittent. So if you have solar, what do you do at night? So many times people buy an excess of, say, solar energy during the day, which they sell, and then at night they buy, fossil energy from the grid. So this was really an intellectual problem. How do you make it 24/7? And we worked together with the client. We co-created with the client this first 24/7 10-year product. And what were the key components? One, we're the leader in energy storage. We started this 12 years ago using lithium-ion batteries so that you can store the energy from renewables. Also, you make it better quality when you inject it because there's no intermittency, no fluctuations in voltage. Second, we are doing a lot of things in solar. We put wind, we put small hydros. But another overlap really was using, I would say, artificial intelligence to simulate 10 years. So what happens in the worst case of a snowstorm, or like they had in Texas, freezing temperatures or outages of plants, et cetera, to be able to come up with something that was cost effective, that was acceptable risk for both parties. Since then, we've done other deals with other big sort of technology players in terms of really getting them 24/7 renewable energy. And it's been very successful. Sometimes, though, the real question is this one of energy and capacity, which honestly, I don't think the media or politicians talk enough about, because renewable energy, we can produce it very cheaply. But can we deliver it to a customer like you 24/7? And that's what becomes tricky. And yes, you can use batteries, but they're still somewhat expensive. How do you combine these things to put them together? So that is the great challenge for us. In some cases, there's an intermediate step. We have worked with the mining sector in Chile. They had long-term contracts with coal plants, specifically for a given mine. So we said, look, let's replace the energy for X hours a day with renewables. And we'll keep the coal plant and run it like a giant battery until batteries get cheap enough to shut down the coal plant. So our plans are to shut it over the next couple of years. So you mentioned partnerships, and I think that's absolutely true. We couldn't help decarbonize the mining sector in Chile without working with the clients. We couldn't help decarbonize the data centers without working with the clients. Because it's not a question of what we can do, it's a question of what you want, which is the client. So it's a very interesting mix. Now, I guess the last thing is, we started investing in lithium-ion batteries for energy storage 10 years ago, and we proved them out. We did an IPO. We spun off the company. Now it's called Fluence, which is a multi-billion-dollar listed company on NASDAQ. It's in about 30 countries. And so we're with this technology, instead of keeping it for us, we're selling it to everybody. We're doing something similar with solar, in the sense we have a small company, a startup, that produces prefab solar. And what's very interesting about this prefab solar is that we can double the energy density on a piece of land, because it's not on stilts, it's laid out like a carpet. We can build it in a third of the time. And very importantly for me is that it's hurricane resistant. So, when you talk about renewables, fine. What happens if you build solar plants in the Caribbean or in southern Florida? Well, they are destroyed every time you have a hurricane, with certainty. So this, I'm not, things may fall on it, but it's absolutely resistant to Category 4 winds. So all these steps we're taking, and again, working with clients and working with startups to provide those new solutions like you're doing. So in our case, the energy sector, to reach our goals, we can reach a lot of them, but I think we're going to need a little bit more smarter grids and things like that. But I think that in a 10-year period, I feel very confident we will get there.
Andres, tell me a little bit on any considerations you might have on this new type of investments when considering considerations from investors, let's say the new ESG, the green finance context that has been evolving so rapidly.
Yeah, that's a great question. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. As of today, because we still have coal, it's still about 20% of the gigawatt hours we produce, we don't qualify for a lot of the ESG investors. So they have bought into some of these spin-offs that we do, which are 100% green. But, when we reach a certain threshold, they will come in. So that, I think, is a great potential that we have. But it's a bit tough because these startups, like startups that are growing 400 or 500% a year, they lose money because you can't capitalize all the expenditures. It goes straight to your P&L. And as a result, they're actually a drag on earnings. So, we're making, let's say, over $1.50 of earnings per share. The drag from the renewable startups is probably about 6 cents. So it's ironic. We're creating billions of dollars on shareholder value, but if you just apply a price earnings multiple to me, it's actually worth negative billions of dollars. So it's a little bit to get our investors comfortable with the fact that you honestly get two companies with us, a company of startup technologies and a traditional generator and utility company. And it hasn't been easy, but I think they're generally getting it. But it's interesting. At some point, you have to spin it off, and at some point, in the next couple of years, we have to cross the threshold to be, really a company that appeals to check the box ESG investors because they're becoming more and more important.
And tell me, Andres, because of what I do see in our case, on the one hand, you are commenting on such innovative and great news like increasing your renewable energy by 70%. Easier to say than to be done. And so many positive developments with some of your customers. Do you have, or how do you deal with I wonder if it is a fact in your industry, it is in ours, on looking at such great business opportunities when moving in this transition to a low carbon economy, while having a negative view from different stakeholders. Like, for instance, some investors believing, cement, because of its transition to a low carbon economy, is going to reduce margins, and they are going to need to make huge investments almost without any return. So how you, if you are going through more or less the same phenomena, how do you deal with the business opportunities that you are developing because you see them and they are profitable when you have these stakeholders around with doubtful on the potential success of your transition?
It's a great question. Now, I think by now, the number who doubt the economy our sector has to go greener less and less. However, what they doubt is the returns. So they'll say, well, that's great, but the returns are dismal. Well, our returns are actually, our IRRs are in the mid-teens. And, very competitive, and actually better than the conventional energy. Now, it's because we are not selling as much a commodity as selling a service to clients like you. What do you want? I want 90% renewable. I want 100%. And we're also like the leader in these new technologies. So that gives us a bit of an edge. But you're right. I mean, the whole renewable sector has been hit by concerns about supply chain, because of the shutdowns in China of sending panels, the issue of forced labor in Western China and the polysilicon coming from there. And it's kind of funny. I feel I've been hit twice because first I talked about this 2 years ago. I said, look, there are going to be shortages. We moved our supply chains out of China into Vietnam, into Malaysia. And we're actually even moving the supply chain of polysilicon from China to Germany and to Korea, where there is no issue of forced labor. But and about 2 years ago, we started up buying good land in the States for interconnections. We spent about $100 million on land. So I think today all those things are reflected very well in terms that we haven't had to, let's say, not complete on time any project because of supply chain issues. But it is sort of funny that you don't get credit for being a little bit ahead of the curve, because I was told that I was very negative on some of my earnings calls, saying there will be problems coming up. So I think, what those investors were still a little bit doubtful about the returns on some of these new technologies. I think it's just something of time. When they see the returns are there and hear the numbers, that's fine. In the States, we've had a bit of a problem that some of the laws did not get passed. So you had the Clean Energy Plan that would basically require the big utilities to transition to renewable energy. Well, that did not get passed. Then you had the Build Back Better plan. And the key aspects of the Build Back Better plan were extending certain tax incentives for renewables. Well, that hasn't been passed yet. But all that said, companies like yourself, the RE100, there's just so much demand for renewables that to some extent, we really haven't seen a slowdown, despite this uncertainty. I think it will get resolved. I think something will get passed on renewables in terms of clarifying the long-term tax incentives. I think it will also include hydrogen and green hydrogen and things like that. But it's somewhat unfortunate because there are some projects are being held back. Some big projects are being held back, and I'm sure your operations in the States are, that you don't know exactly, what is the tax structure, and it is important. These is you can have up to 30% tax incentives, and so it's not helping us move faster.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, I have no clue, but most probably when the light bulb was invented, candles used to have a higher return. So I agree with you, it's a matter of time. I think businesses have gone through, let me call it, a market of promises last year and the year before, because of this new demand, this new expectation from different stakeholders and society in general. We are all reacting. We are all redefining. We are all looking for ways to effectively make this transition to a low carbon economy. But probably different stakeholders still don't believe it, either customers or investors or other stakeholders. So I think we will need time to demonstrate, to show that there are things that can be done with current technologies, processes, practices, and materials. And there are other investments in R&D, in innovation, that are very promising. And of course, they are expensive. In first stages, you have to expect that is not cheap, but through time, well, what can I tell you? You are the expert in solar energy. How the cost of generating solar energy has been dropping year after year for the last, 20 years. So I think we all have to be, on the one hand, patient and making lots of effort in improving, in demonstrating that the transition to a low carbon economy is doable and is profitable. It can be done. If I develop a lower carbon product with adding limestone or pozzolanic material, which is a sort of a natural cement, the cost of that ton of cement is lower and not higher. If I produce cement with household waste, some people might say, how can you produce cement with household waste as a fuel? Yes, we are doing it. We produce cement in the UK, in Germany, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, with household waste. 90% of our fuel is household waste with about 50% content of biomass. That is doable today, and that is a better business proposition than other fossil fuels. So through time, we have to proactively communicate and demonstrate that a green and circular economy is convenient for the planet, is convenient for people, and is convenient for businesses. So that is a sort of a dilemma. That's why I was asking you. We are all trying all these new things, but seems like there is not enough credibility, and it's expensive, and it's doubtful, and so it's very interesting.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, especially when we started this. I mean, I remember on battery storage. When I would talk to investors at these, meetings that we have, some would roll their eyes, like, "Oh my gosh, they're going to talk about batteries again." And our investments in battery had a 20x. Have had a phenomenal return, something that you don't get from the energy business. So I'm getting much less of that now. I'm getting less. We've had actually about 4 unicorns where we took them, a small company, to more than $1 billion valuation. So now the questions are more like, what's your next unicorn going to be? Now that you've done a couple. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it was very difficult. We had to have great conviction to continue on this because it was a drag on our earnings. And it's ended up, and I think that we've only started to see the potential, the size of this. Now, you mentioned, also, I think a very important point. You mentioned circular green economy because, you don't take into account all the externalities. And to me, it's going to be very interesting for fossil fuels, and weighing the different options. What is the true carbon footprint, scope 3? So, I think we need some honest numbers. If you're bringing in, say, natural gas from Siberia to Europe across 9 time zones, how much is the leakage from that gas pipeline in the production? And that has to be taken into account. And I think it will. I think the fact if the companies that don't make the transition will suddenly wake up to the problem and it will be too late.
Yeah.
And those stakeholders which were resisting will tell you, why didn't you move sooner? So I think it's a very risky strategy not to adapt to this. Now, you were just at COP26 in Glasgow, right? And signed some important agreements. And so what is your sort of takeaways from the meetings you had there?
Well, I think that I've been somehow commenting the latest, let's say, facts or expectations on a transition to a low carbon economy. I think on the one hand, there are more stringent demands on industries in order to decisively move forward into a low carbon economy. On the other hand, I see some, let me call them new stakeholders, or recent, they are not new, but they are recent stakeholders advocating and demanding businesses to move forward. I do believe, for instance, that the U.S. investor community in the last few years have been really moving towards the idea of a low carbon economy and in a very proactive manner, making decisions on investments and the messaging they are doing is tremendous. When you hear BlackRock, when you hear Larry Fink saying things like, everybody's moving towards a low carbon economy, companies should have solutions into this transition. But as in any other business development issues, those companies moving forward, innovating, investing, and demonstrating that they are effectively moving towards a net zero economy, those companies will see inflows of customers, of investors, of potential employees. So and those not doing the job or being perceived as as not evolving properly or timely, what they want to see is outflows. So my conclusion after COP26, and if you remember earlier, I said, even though this is such an old topic, it's decades long, climate change and climate action, it has a new meaning. And I do believe that in the years to come, businesses need to demonstrate an effective way to move fast into a low carbon economy.
I completely agree. I think there's a sense of urgency today that we lost, and now it's come back. And these things can go much quicker. And you mentioned one of the stakeholders, our employees. Today, to attract millennials into your companies and the most talented people, they not only care about getting a paycheck, but they also care about, are they making a difference in the world? So if you're not concerned about, producing as in as environmentally friendly a way as possible, you're not going to attract the best talent or keep the best talent. And so I think that's absolutely fundamental to what leaders, and again, I think that Cemex has really stood out in your sector and among the Latin American companies of taking a very bold stance and thinking about the future. So in our case, again, I think it's been quite well established. I mean, the problem for us, again, is really that we're just seeing so much demand. How can you possibly supply so much demand? And you have the issue of, companies within companies. And so, how can you have this sort of unicorn factory, working inside a traditional utility? Now, some people say, well, why do you have them together? But just like you're doing, I find that having the big established company is fundamental because it gives it a platform to growth. So we can take a small, creative outside group, put it to work with our experts on our platform, and we can finance it. We can give it a much greater scale, grow it at 400 or 500% a year that they could never do on their own. So we create value two ways. One, these startups become much more valuable. And again, we're partners. We never own 100% of them. But it also makes our, let's say, core business cleaner, greener, more competitive. So, my view is we'll remain, with this synergistic relationship as long as we're adding value. If, 5 years from now, this has become commoditized, everybody uses it, we're not creating a special sauce with them, well, then they probably should be just totally spun off. It shouldn't be under us. But that is the trick. How do you keep a great big company, take these creative young people, and don't bureaucratize them, allow them to grow. So you kind of try to get the best of both worlds. But I think that we're all both, in a very similar view of things, that these things have to change. Now, there's investors, there's stakeholders, there's our employees, there's our customers. And there's also, how do you, one thing I think we're both dealing with is how do you affect the transition, because you can't do it overnight. And that is the key, because I'm sure you heard at COP, you're mentioning some people who want drastic overnight, which is not realistic. So how do you deal with that and just say, look, I'm doing all I can. It's going to take me 5 years to get there, but I can't do it tomorrow.
Indeed, but I think we can and we have to speed up the process. For several industries and several geographies, there is still a way to go with current technologies, with current processes and practices. I have to repeat that again. I already said that in the case of Europe, we have reduced 35% our emissions, while in the rest of the world is about 20%.
No.
And what we do in Europe, we are doing everywhere. It is just that the speed at which you can implement practices and processes in countries or regions where a circular economy is already in place is so different. This idea of extracting, producing, using, and landfilling is gone. But we need rules and regulations to be supportive of the idea of a circular economy on use and reuse and recycle and reutilize and again, and not to landfill or almost not to landfill anything. So, Andres, by hearing all your experiences and the way you have already go with all these issues, how can you transmit a message to other businesses, other companies? What is it that you can tell other businesses in terms of your challenges, your ideas, and the way you are leading your company?
Well, I think my experience has been similar to you in the sense that, sort of think hard of the future and think hard of this future that's going to be a circular economy. It's going to be green. And you want to get ahead of it. I always say that the right approach is a little bit like surfing. I'm not a surfer, but from what I can tell, you have to hit the wave just right. So if you wait too long, the wave will have faster and you're not going to surf. Now and you also don't want to get too far ahead because like the technology doesn't work, you don't ride the wave either. So it's a question, there's some timing issue there. But I would say, look, that you have to be bold, and you have to take, there is no riskless world. So if you take no risks, there's a huge risk that you're going to end up with a product that's no longer desired by your customers because of its lack of environmental friendliness. So you do have to take some risks. They have to be measured risks. And also if you're doing something totally new, you don't hit 1,000%. If you're batting 75, 80%, that's pretty good. You're not going to bat 1,000%. So you have to have this, I would say, risk. I'll say tolerance, but it also has to be smart risks. You just don't bet on it. Now, the last thing I'd say, because it's true that in Europe has a much more inclusive concept of this. Now, I am on the board of the Edison Electric Institute, which is the umbrella organization of all the US utilities. And the one thing I have been convinced is that the US is very bad at selling itself. We are the electric sector that has most diminished its carbon intensity of any of the big economies. And you would never get that impression, from the general media. Now, it is true that a lot of this was substituting natural gas for coal plants. But we're shutting down in the States one Argentina a year of coal plants and substituting it for natural gas. We're also building a tremendous amount of renewables. So to contrast this with China. China is building the most renewables of anybody now in the world. Then it's also building the most coal plants. So the net effect is that, if you look at total output, the States, even though it never signed the Paris Accord, is the closest to achieving the Paris Accord agreements on the electric sector. So that's why, it's interesting. I think part of it is that the governments have just not really been very good at selling themselves, even say the industry itself. So you mentioned the change in investor sentiment. What to me has been fascinating is like 5 years ago, among my colleagues in the electric sector, I was one of the outliers saying, look, we've got to decarbonize, this is coming, a sense of urgency. I would say most of the big electric companies in the US now have zero carbon pledges for 2050, or maybe, might be just scope 1 or 2040. And the government's talking about 2035, which did not get passed. But the point is the shift that I have seen in the mindset of the US electric sector in 5 years has just been phenomenal. So the one good hope to about the States is that when it moves very quickly. But it's not particularly good at sort of trumpeting its own achievements. So the U.S., I have great confidence that the private sector will make the changes necessary here in the U.S. And it's almost like the government just should, I do think that it's got to even the playing field with the taxes. because the fossil fuel industry does have a lot of subsidies. So they do have to do that. But I would say, they should accompany what the private sector is doing more than force the private sector to do anything. It's no longer necessary.
Interesting. Andres, it's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Hopefully we will have the chance to continue the conversation beyond the event we are participating right now.
Likewise, Fernando, I always learn a lot talking to you, and I hope we can see each other in post-pandemic and in person sometime. So I think we'll turn it now to Maria to see what questions we have.
There's a very strong argument that if you want to take care of shareholders and stakeholders today, it's critical to have CEOs that are engaged and ahead of the curve in climate change and sustainability issues. So thank you both, because really you're an example to our region. And now we want to turn to questions. We have quite a few of them, so we'll get through as many as we can. So I want to ask the people. I see Fernando there already. Is introduce yourselves, and if you can mention who the question is for. The first one is Fernando from Bank of America.
Fernando Iraola, good morning, and thank you very much to the Council for bringing this critical topic to the agenda. And congratulations, Fernando. Great to see you. And Andres, great to see you too on your leadership on this topic and the progress that your companies are doing towards not only executing, but really creating more awareness about the business imperatives around ESG. Question to you, Fernando. You have taken a very interesting approach when it comes to crafting your ESG strategies and metrics against which you are reporting performance and updating your stakeholders on how are you doing on ESG. The concept of materiality to drive that strategy and define those metrics. Can you tell us a bit more about that process, that approach, and how has that informed your decisions on strategy and execution? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for your question, Fernando. Good to see you. Let me try to briefly, provide some context to the question. First part, we realized that stakeholders or society in general was moving faster than ourselves, and we changed that in the last 18 months, let's put it that way. And we adjusted our intention, our aspiration, and our commitments, starting with fully aligning with the Paris Agreement, with the beyond 2 degrees scenario, with the 1.5 scenario, with the race to zero, and with all the movements that we believe are conducive to a net zero or a low carbon economy in the years to come. And by doing that, then we did change our specific objectives. So we used to have objectives since time ago. So we took the objectives we used to have by 2030 and moved them forward to 2025. And it defined much more demanding objectives by 2030, like perhaps one of the most important ones is the reduction of CO2 per ton of cement, a reduction of 40% when using the 1990 base, which is the base that it's been used already for ages. So that is why we are now having these really demanding objectives by 2030, and now the ones also very demanding for 2025. The other thing that I can comment is that, because we in the conversation we mentioned, it is pretty important for stakeholders to believe what's happening. It's very, promises are promises, which is what we did. Now we have to demonstrate that it's doable. So we have to work on properly communicating to the investor community, to customers, to employees, to authorities, to different stakeholders that is doable. And as I mentioned during the conversation, we can achieve our targets without any new technology, meaning it is using current technologies, current materials, processes, everything. We can do that. I mentioned that in the case of Europe, we have reduced already 35%. So this is our new target is reducing 40 all over Cemex. It's doable, and we will be demonstrating. One thing that we have done is define 4 pillars that we are going to be consistently developing. Enlarging our low carbon family of products for customers. That's key. We are not starting doing that. It is just that we are going to reinforce all our Vertua family of products was introduced 2 years ago. So we are doing decarbonizing our operations. That's a huge thing. We have defined, we call it CO2 reduction roadmaps per cement plant. So we know per cement plant what is it that needs to be done to achieve those objectives. We have innovation. Andres was commenting for instance, partnerships done on innovation. For years, we created Cemex Ventures, and through Cemex Ventures, we are bringing startups and interested parties in our field to develop products and technologies for us to be used. This is trying to simplify the definition. This is an open innovation system. We used to have our R&D areas, and we still have them, and they are highly specialized. But when you are working on a process to produce clinker with solar energy, you need partners in the solar energy business to really work on those issues. So we have a number of partnership in a number of interesting issues we need to develop in the years to come. And the other aspect that I insist, we need to work on different economies to move forward at high speed towards the concept of a circular economy. In a circular economy, the cement industry shines. We can clean, we can use byproducts and waste from society 50 times more than the waste we produce ourselves. We can use your household waste to produce cement. We can use other industries' wastes to produce cement. So, but we need all the parameters and the rules for a circular economy to work. So hopefully that has answered your question, Fernando.
Thank you very much. Fascinating. Congratulations again.
Thank you, Fernando. Both Fernandos. Great to see you. Next, Angela Gomez from SAP. Angela?
Hi. Yes, sure. Hi, Fernando. How are you? So thank you very much for sharing us not only your priorities on sustainability, but also the how you are doing it. We really, really appreciate what you are doing for Mexico, of course, and for the rest of the world. So you talk a lot about alliances with technology companies to reach your sustainability objectives. We know SAP is an important technology partner for Cemex. So if you can kindly share your expectations, or in general, what does a CEO should expect from a technology company like us to support you in this journey?
Well, there are different, thank you for your question, Angela. There are different types of technologies that we will be needing. There are, for instance, technologies related to production processes and technologies related, for instance, to IT. Let me start by technologies needed for production processes. Carbon capture is kind of a new mantra. Well, it's not that new, but it's something that has to be developed. There are several startups and companies working in a sort of a transversal way. Different industries produce CO2. So it's a solution for different industries, not necessarily for cement in particular. And we are not experts in carbon capture and carbon use technologies, but we have developed partnerships with several of them. Carbon Clean, Carbon Upcycling, Carbonate, a number of companies, which are sort of new startups that we are working with. And as Andres mentioned in his case, we are bringing these companies and we are facilitating all our assets, all our plans for them to make pilots and for us to work with them and in a collaboration, try to develop a solution that is specific for the cement industry. So we have right now like 7 or 8 pilots at a plant level working on carbon capture and use. Now, let me speak a little bit about different type of technologies, IT technologies. We do have a digital transformation strategy, and we have three elements in that strategy. The one that we, let's say, have been insisting the most, and we started with that element of the strategy, is digitizing our relation with customers and building new business models to relate with customers. Our platform, it's been there already for 2-3 years. We call it Cemex Go, which is a platform that we use for interacting with the customers. And as you can imagine, it's a platform that is getting new versions, much powerful, much more functionalities, easier, better customer experience. So that is being working. We need all type of support from different IT companies to continue evolving in this platform. The other element in our strategy is everything related to administration. So is how we can, sometimes the way I put it is, why is it that we cannot manage the company as playing a video game? I mean, what's missing? What is that we can automate? What is that we can do to simplify, to automate, to centralize, and this is, regardless of the angle you start with, you end up with technology. The trick is technology. So that's also very, very important. And the other element of the strategy is digitizing our production and transportation activities. And again, any support on IT technology in these three elements of the digitization strategy is very relevant. For instance, just one example, and relating digital technology with climate action. Fleet efficiency is of essence in the Scope 3 world. And platforms on last mile and other platforms on proper coordination between customers, production, distribution centers, and transportation, is key. And these new technologies are allowing us and allowing businesses in general to make that much more efficiency, and because of that, less pollution.
Thank you both. I know we have. Thank you, Angela. I think we have.
Thank you, Fernando.
Yes, we have 2 more questions and then we'll close. Phil, it seems the tech sector is very interested in this conversation from Salesforce. Welcome, Phil.
It always is. Thank you so much. This is a great panel, a great conversation. Fernando, Andres, this is so nurturing. Thank you so much. So I'm Phil Seabuck with Salesforce. I guess this question addresses both of you. So, I mean, and I think we've covered a lot of this, but as you think net zero and you think of the corporate responsibility moving forward, my question to you is, what do you think is the specific responsibility of a CEO in 2022 to lead their company to a net zero world? And what do you think they should be held accountable for?
I'll go ahead and take that one. Look, I think that one is setting a long-term vision of where you want to get to. Mm-hmm. But that's easy. It's a little bit, politicians tend to do that. Instead of 2060,
every day,
they figure nobody will be in office by then. So I think what's very important is then to have short-term and medium goals. Because so that short-term goals gives it a sense of urgency. So I think that's absolutely certain. And then second is, this is changing very fast. So you have to see how the environment is changing, how the laws are changing, how your customers' needs are changing. So even though you have that, so that's why I think it's more like a long-term vision. You have a strategy where you want to go, but then you have to be flexible on the tactics, because newer technologies may come up, or more efficient ways, or customers' preferences might change. So I think it's absolutely fundamental, because I think that any CEO who's not concerned about this is going to have a very rude awakening, or if he's not there, his company's going to have a very rude awakening at some point in the future.
Thank you, Andres.
If I may add, I think Andres has been very clear on this issue when he said you need to think hard about the future. And you know what? At the end, a visionary, a person or visionaries, meaning a group, at the end they are a group of people that see something that other people just don't see. So I think when a CEO is exposed to these challenges and these dilemmas, we have the opportunity to see. It doesn't mean that you are blinded. It's nothing. You are sitting in a chair that allows you to see and then to act on these issues. So think hard in the future. The future is green and is circular, and there won't be room for businesses that do not make an effective and fast transition into this economy.
Very well stated. Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, Phil. So we have the last question, Benny from Softec.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Fernando and Andres. It was a great conversation. Good to see you, Fernando, and nice to meet you, Andres. Given my background, I come from Softec and information technology, and for the past 4 years, bridging information technology with operations technology. So I'm very much involved in this digital transformation related to how we can make things better as an ecosystem. And Andres, you mentioned something, and congratulations, by the way. Not every company is able to develop those internal innovations into big ventures. I mean, I've seen a lot of those fail when they try to do that in-house, as opposed to having that coming from outside. Congratulations. You mentioned something very important, which is the integration with the customers. I know, Fernando, with Cemex Go, you have probably gone beyond in bigger steps there, but in your sector, Andres, who's leading that ecosystem, that platform integration, and what role would companies like Softec could play in that arena? Because I think there's a tremendous opportunity for better use of energy in general if we can see a better ecosystem integrated.
Look, I completely agree. Look, I'd say we're working with various companies, some big tech companies, sort of visualization of the grid itself. Still sometimes, when you have outages, you send out crews and it's like finding a needle in the haystack to see what went wrong. When you have wildfires in California, you shut off millions of people in some cases, and you could be much more precise. So we're working on that with some big tech companies. We do have a company called Uplight. Uplight is the biggest seller of nests in the country. People don't know it. It's actually the engine behind 80 US electric and gas utilities. So we reach about 80% of US households through Uplight, in which we own a 30% and work very closely in our utilities. And recently, Schneider Electric joined us at Uplight, bought a stake in it, and is bringing their technologies. So at Uplight, all these energy efficiency services, we're providing, that platform for our customers. So you may go into your local utility and want to buy a nest. Well, what we do is we aggregate it. We make sure that the utility gets its subsidy and you get your subsidy, and you don't have to mail in coupons or fill out forms. But that's a very simple example. We have much other ones where we're actually dealing with how do you change customers' behaviors so that you can better use your electricity. With the batteries, we also have a separate company with Influence. We have the biggest bidding engine. And so the key is not only how to charge and discharge your lithium-ion batteries into the grid efficiently, how do you make the most money for your customers? So how does it's efficiency, technically efficiency financially. So on both of these, we're getting into AI algorithms and learning. And I think the key is that both in Uplight and in Fluence, we actually have the biggest user base. So as you know very well, I'm sure from AI, that's your moat, because you will be learning more, and once you learn more, your algorithm will be better. So that's really the integration where we're actually getting into creating these platforms. But they also have to be able to talk to the other platforms, whatever the system somebody else is on. But these are specific niches that we have carved out where we have some special know-how that we can contribute.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Fernando, did you want to take that? Or I think we're almost out. We're pretty much out of time. But thank you really both, Andres and Fernando. This has been a fantastic conversation. There's a recent quote from the Harvard Business Review that just really made me think. I think it's a leadership quote of 2022. And it says, "The challenge of performing while transforming has become the leadership test of our time." And I thank you both because we can only imagine the challenging job. And it is very important for us to really showcase the leadership, both regionally and globally. So thank you. This means very much to us. And thanks to everyone who joined us this morning. We look forward to continuing this conversation on these key topics. And I hope everybody stays well. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.